And now to our next topic, the role of travel in keeping donors engaged, educated, and continuing to give. There is no better moderator for this panel than Victoria Wu, Donor Trips and Events Manager for the Nature Conservancy, with its more than 1 million members dedicated to preserving lands and rivers. She and her team create custom events and travel experiences to recognize donors and show them the impact of their gifts. Please welcome Victoria Wu.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for those kind remarks, even though probably a better moderator would have been Laura Goby, who is in your programs. So thank you for having me in her place. So I'm Victoria Wu. I'm the Donor Trips and Events Manager with the Nature Conservancy's Africa team, and I am delighted to be representing our organization today as we discuss donor travel. My colleague, Laura Goby, unfortunately cannot be here due to medical issues, and she sends her apologies and her best wishes. But I'm pretty sure that Laura is not only with us spiritually, but virtually. So, hey, Laura, and I hope you will all join me in sending my best wishes right back to her. On behalf of everyone at the Nature Conservancy, I would really like to thank the incredible CREST team for inviting us to participate. We are so proud to be platinum sponsors of this event. At the Nature Conservancy, our travel programs prioritize building long-term relationships between donors and the communities that they invest in. Demonstrating impact is a large part of building a successful experience, but just as important is showcasing the challenges and, showcasing the work of scientists and experts and the community members on the ground who share in both the successes and challenges of the issues they face with donors, thereby bringing them into the conversation of change. Each of our panelists today has created such change through their work, and I'm delighted to introduce our first presenter, Neely Gurbani. In fact, I'm going to invite everybody. Would all my panelists like to join me while I tell you guys about Neely? So Neely is the Director of Donor Engagement at the American Jewish World Service, where she creates meaningful opportunities to bridge the geographic gap between the organization's supporters and those promoting human rights in the developing world. Her team plans events and educational engagements nationwide and international study tour trips to bring donors to meet activists in their communities. Welcome, Neely.
Thank you. My name is Neely Gurbani, and I am the Director of Donor Engagement at American Jewish World Service, based in New York. AJWS is a 35-year-old international human rights organization that is guided and inspired by progressive Jewish values. We fundraise primarily from the American Jewish community, and then we give that money in the form of grants to activists, movements, and organizations that are fighting to end poverty and promote human rights in the developing world. And to date, we have 435 grantee partners in 19 countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And I just need to give a quick shout out to Minu and the Azad Foundation, who is one of our 435 partners. At AJWS, we're committed to supporting the most vulnerable people in the world because we believe that the people most affected by the world's most pressing issues are best suited to address them. They need resources to make their fight for human rights a reality, and that's where we step in. We don't have any of our own projects. We fund organizations that already exist, are already doing this work in their communities, and we build our strategies around theirs. Our most valuable fundraising tool is our study tour program, our donor travel program. It's open to current and prospective donors who can make a gift of $25,000 or more to the organization. Travelers pay for their participation, and they know that traveling with AJWS comes with an expectation that they'll increase their philanthropic support to the organization. The study tour program has 4 main goals. The first is to bridge a community of people who need money to make their fight for human rights a reality with a community of philanthropists who are committed to using their money to make serious impact in the world. The second goal is to turn potential donors into donors. The third is to turn donors into higher level donors. And the fourth is to serve as a board pipeline. And in fact, almost 100% of our Board of Trustees either joined the board or assumed a leadership position on the board after traveling on a study tour. And this is an example, Marian Bergman, one of our oldest board members, here on a study tour in southern India. So with the few minutes I have left, I want to talk to you today about our secret sauce for turning travelers into lifelong supporters. There are three main ingredients. The first is proximity, the second is reflection, and the third is passion. Proximity, we bring our travelers close to the people that they're supporting. We facilitate really intimate interactions between these travelers and human rights heroes that they never would have come across otherwise. This is not a dog and pony show. It's not a one-way presentation. It is a true cross-cultural and intercultural exchange. And here you see a photo of some of our travelers in a forest in rural Uganda meeting with an organization that is using indigenous farming methods as a way to help protect and preserve the land that they depend on for survival and as a way to combat climate change. And here's a photo of some of our travelers in the home of a family in southern India that is supporting and accompanying their daughter as she fights to end the practice of early and child marriage. Our second ingredient as we turn travelers into lifelong supporters is reflection. At AJWS, we believe that people remember what they discover on their own, and we create opportunities for people to weave what they're learning throughout the study tour into their own cloth. There's a few ways that we do this formally and informally. The first is through journal writing, and we invite each of our travelers to journal throughout the trip, and each morning, one traveler volunteers to read what they wrote the day before. It might seem silly that we're reflecting on an experience as we're living it, but it actually makes a huge impact because our donors get to relive the crazy day they had the day before through not only their words, but their fellow travelers' words. And here's a photo of one of our travelers, now turned board member, Suzanne, reading a reflection on the way to a rural community in Kenya. The second way that we do this is through formal curriculum sessions, and we integrate them into pivotal points in the schedule when we guess that people might need a moment to pause and reflect on what they're experiencing. We guess this ahead of time. We know the schedule in and out, and we know when people might need to take a moment. And the third way that we infuse reflection is through creating opportunities for people to live out their Jewish values throughout the experience. And here's a photo of one of our travelers leading a Shabbat, a Sabbath service in southern India. And the third ingredient in our recipe for turning travelers into lifelong donors is passion. We tap into the overwhelming feeling of connection as soon as they get home. We know that that feeling that people have as soon as they get back doesn't last forever. It kind of wanes and it evolves. So as soon as our travelers get home, as soon as the trip ends, the staff who are in the field and each of our major gift officers meet, and we come up with a post-trip fundraising and engagement strategy for each traveler. The staff who are traveling, we take what we learned about our donors in the field, their motivations, their passions, their philanthropic drive, and we take that to develop a strategy for how we can continue to engage them more deeply and more long-term when they get home. And a couple of ways that we do that is through stewarding them through our major gifts program. We also plan events and advocacy engagements so that they can continue to deepen their engagement with our work. And here's a photo of Judy Stern, one of our board members, and her husband with one of our partners from Burma at a gala in New York City. And the last is that we have a robust alumni engagement network. We do virtual reunions about 3 months after a trip gets back. We send email updates and newsletters, and we also have a Facebook group so that people can continue not only to connect with each other, with their fellow travelers, but to also hear updates about the partners that they met and connected so deeply with. So in summary, the way that we turn our travelers into lifelong supporters is we bring them close together. We create opportunities for discovery, learning, and reflection, and we tap into their passion and excitement when they get home. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Neely. All right, next we're going to introduce you to Catherine. Catherine Reddington is the Vice President of Social Impact Journeys and Business Development at Elevation Destinations. Catherine holds a Master's in International Education and Development from Columbia University and is certified by the UNWTO in Sustainable Practices for Tourism Development. She uses this training to plan extraordinary trips for philanthropists and impact investors in some of the most challenging areas around the globe. Welcome, Catherine.
Thanks so much for inviting me to be here. It really is a professional highlight to speak at this. Crest, I've been admire their work, and they've been such a proponent for sustainable travel, so it's a pleasure to be here. So, transformational travel. In today's travel industry, it is not enough to have perfect logistics and introduce people to new places. People want authenticity, but more than that, they want their journey to be life-changing. And that has ushered in an entire new realm of transformational travel, which the travel market right now is trying to meet these current needs. I work for a company, my name is Catherine Reddington, and I work for a company called Elevate Destinations. I've been here 7 years, and I've touched about 115 different types of donor trips over a wide variety of issue areas. Clean water, animal welfare, human rights, human trafficking, you name it, our organization has been a part of those types of trips in one sort of fashion or the other. We run donor trips on behalf of nonprofit organizations that have asked for our services. We never run donor trips independently. They're always done in partnerships. And I feel that the field of donor travel sets probably the highest bar for what transformational travel can look like. It's not just about the person, it's also about the destination. And after working over all these trips, I have found that donor trips, the most sophisticated ones, have incredible goals. Some of their goals are a shift in power dynamics. Some of them aim to adjust systems that create positive outcomes for the communities. They need money and influence to do this, and giving is only a part of that process. So my goal in this presentation is to showcase what steps really effective organizations take on their donor trips to create transformation, not just for their travelers, but for the places that they visit. And hopefully some of my colleagues in the travel industry can glean some insights to apply to their own itineraries as they are planning. So first and foremost, they never work in isolation. They always collaborate with experts. Many times they are the experts, but they work very closely with the community. They have a very deep understanding of the issues they're trying to address. They address the intangible aspects of the trip. So this includes things like asking people about identity, why they're there. They might ask questions such as, what identities are you placing on the people that you're visiting? What identities might they be placing on you? They ask what their connection is to the work. They recognize power and privilege. That means when people step foot into the community, they are ripe with empathy and self-awareness. They always put the community first. They make sure the community gives their informed consent for telling their story and opening up their homes. They make sure that the person is aware of the purpose of sharing their story and what it will be used to advocate for. They make sure they evaluate the risk to an individual in sharing their story and how to mitigate that risk if one exists. They ensure accurate translation, and they examine if there's any trauma for retelling a story. They also make sure that any opportunity costs for someone participating in that journey are compensated fairly. Words have power. And the stories they select are incredibly powerful. But more than that, they evoke a call to justice, not pity. They avoid perpetuating existing narratives around marginalization and stereotypes, and they create stories that motivate travelers to a clear call to action. They do not simplify the problem. This is not a TED Talk, this is a several-day journey. They show more than one side to the story, even if it is difficult or challenging to do. They put on journalists, they put on politicians and professors. They circle back to systems change and how an individual is part of that system. They do this by showcasing that the problem that they're sharing is not the problem. The problem itself sometimes isn't even the problem. Sometimes the system is the problem. And they allow participants to identify what that lever is for them in that system, whether it's money, whether it's their time, or whether it's their political advocacy. They always have a reentry plan for travelers. The journey is the catalyst. It is not the finish line. So in conclusion, I think we in the travel industry have a choice to make about how serious we take the ideas and concepts of transformational travel. I, for one, am incredibly excited about new perspectives and new narratives coming to the forefront of more of mass tourism. However, if we are using local communities to help shape that type of transformation, it is only fair that we extend transformation and support to those communities and identify what their outcomes are, because they are doing the hosting. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Catherine. All right, next we have Jim. Jim Sano is the World Wildlife Fund's Vice President for Conservation Travel. He was formerly president of Geographic Expedition and a park ranger at Yosemite National Park. That was cool as that. Jim was the founding chairman of the Mono Lake Foundation and has served on the boards of on the boards of the Trust for Public Land, the Natural Step, and the Yosemite Restoration Fund. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Victoria. It's really a delight to be here, and I'm especially honored today to be part of celebrating Martha Honey's contributions to advancing responsible travel. Really, again, a wonderful opportunity. I am going to talk about travel philanthropy and really its role in advancing an institutional mission. But first, I want to start by taking a short walk to the Lincoln Memorial, one of my favorite places in Washington, D.C., where the Gettysburg Address and the second inaugural address is inscribed in the wall. But one thing that many people don't realize is that in 1864, in the depths of the Civil War, when 2,000 soldiers were dying every day, Lincoln signed a bill called the Yosemite Grant that, for the first time in human history, preserved a large tract of land for everyone and not just for the rich and famous. And very early on, there were individuals who recognized that it's one thing to create a protected area, it's another thing to steward it and gain support for those protected areas. John Muir was one of those individuals. And also, in the very early days, the very new Sierra Club recognized that it was really important to get people out to the park to ultimately support the park. It was actually the Sierra Club outings was the first such program in the world to do that. So fast forward, when I was a Cub Ranger with the National Park Service, I had the opportunity to go to a training course. And at Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, which is where the Park Service Training Academy is. And one of the individuals that taught that course is an old friend of Crest, Dr. Sam Ham, a communications professor, and I call him the Yoda of park interpretation. And one of the things that he did was that was really groundbreaking was he designed a travel philanthropy program for Lindblad expeditions. He got together with the irascible Sven Lindblad to create this program to say, how can we get travelers engaged to give money to support conservation? And so he designed a very carefully choreographed communication strategy without the travelers knowing it. And ultimately, the travelers opened up their wallet. And so to this day, 70% of those travelers who go on a Lindblad voyage contribute money, and it raises roughly $500,000 a year to support Galapagos conservation. And so that got me really to thinking, but also a study that really stands out in my mind that was done by American Express and this market research firm called MMGY. Peter Yesevich, you've probably heard him speak before. And it really described the arc of the traveler's journey. And it starts actually quite a bit before the trip starts, when the trip planning, trip dreaming stage. And actually, in the pre-trip phase, it's 40%. On the trip itself, it's 20%. And when people get home, that's the remaining 40% when they're thinking about their great memories or sharing photos and really reflecting upon their trip. And so when we embarked, and I see Carl Egloff up there, and my other colleagues, Tanya Curry and Hannah Wagner, when we embarked upon looking at WWF's travel program, we really kind of rethought the business model, if you will. And we partnered with one single tour operator, Natural Habitat Adventures, that focuses just on natural history trips, which is obviously what we want for WWF. But we also wanted to partner with a very responsible tour operator that is at the vanguard of advancing sustainable practices, such as they recently announced this last spring that they're including the cost of offsetting not only the land portion of the trip, but also the entire air journey into the trip cost for every one of their travelers. So here we go again to Sam Hamm. We retained him to look at how can we choreograph the WWF message throughout the trip, throughout the marketing, the marketing of the trip, when people are just beginning to dream about the trip, and the why travel with NatHab and WWF. What kinds of conservation content are you going to get? And so inside of the marketing materials, there's WWF content material. When somebody signs up on a trip, this is just before they've even gone, they're given materials to educate them about where they're going and some of the conservation issues. The guides are very much actively involved. We go out to Boulder, Colorado, and help in training the guides. We provide them a lot of resource materials and so forth. And ultimately, to kind of underscore the WWF's mission and what we're all about. And so we want our guides to be the Natural Habitat and WWF guides to be that communicator, educator. And so with Sam's help, we identified talking points that ideally the guides are weaving in and out throughout the journey of the trip. And then when they get back home, then they're also continue to be touched. And in this case, we just basically took a page off from Lindblad and created an incentive. NatHab was very generous in creating an incentive for people to give a donation. And so this is kind of the starts of how travel can influence philanthropic behavior. And so obviously one part is to acquire new donors, and the 250-250 program that Lindblad pioneered is one such way. Also, elevate the giving and the retention rate. You'll see these numbers up here, pretty stunning numbers, right? And it's not unusual because we've been comparing notes over the years with alumni associations, museums, and so forth, and those are the kind of numbers that you can achieve if you do it right, and really kind of elevate the giving levels. And then the other thing I wanted to leave you with is just that oftentimes people look at trips as kind of a one-time transaction, but like in any kind of business, I would encourage you to look at it as the lifetime value, if you will, of acquiring a new donor. That really, in terms of travel philanthropy, it's a really powerful tool. It's one tool amidst many different tools that are in the development in our fundraising toolkit to really, and it probably, I think, is one of the most powerful tools to really drive home the why support a NGO. So thank you.
All right. So I've got a couple questions for our panelists, then we'll open it up. Oh, is that better? Yeah. Okay, good. All right, everybody. So what does a transformational travel experience look like for donors of your organizations? And how do you create opportunities for them to develop positive long-term impact on the destinations that they visit?
I'll start. I feel like I covered most of this during my presentation, but I just want to really focus in on, for us, what has worked has been the giving minimum and the giving expectation. We don't ever want someone to be surprised about the expectation for their philanthropy when they get home. So we're really, really clear about that up front, and we're really clear that we're not a travel agency. We are a human rights organization, and this is a fundraising tool. And so we really, really do expect our donors to engage more deeply with us when they get home. And also our major gift stewardship plan. So my team sits within the fundraising division, and we do all of the planning, but we partner really closely with our major gift officers, as I talked about, for that fundraising and engagement strategy that's so important in connecting people more further and more deeply when they get home.
Yeah, our goals are always shared because we are partnering with nonprofit organizations, so we also embody their goals. But it is our job to make sure on the travel side that we are traveling a trip that would make them proud and maximizing the impact of their dollars abroad. But we do hope that all of those travelers become ambassadors for those countries, but also for the issues that they're examining and working on and thinking about, that it's not just about the destination, but how that also trickles into other parts of the world.
Well, in terms of the whole transformational question, we frankly don't expect people to be transformed on the trip. We want people to be transformed, but the idea is to provide them very enriching educational experiences with the hope they will be. So.
I found your Adam Sandler.
Hi, Adam.
So, Catherine, you talked about the importance of how we implied transformational not only to our donors' experience, but to the impact on the communities that you visit. So, how do the most effective organizations prepare their travelers to follow this paradigm? And how do they measure the success of how communities are being transformed over time?
Well, I touched a little bit about this in the presentation, but what we typically do when we work with an organization is we map out all the touch points we have with a traveler before a trip begins, and are very intentional about how we are using those touch points. Everything from the tone and messaging for the purpose behind the trip, including materials that they are getting, the questions that are being asked, sometimes about identity, sometimes about power and privilege, sometimes about their connection to the work. So there's several opportunities. There's also, we always do virtual orientations, and sometimes if organizations can do that, they also have them in person. So there is a lot of work that can be done before anyone sets foot in a community. Many organizations also do that in country itself for the first day before they're getting into a community. And that really is what opens up people's minds before they're there. And in terms of how they're mapping outcomes, for trips that we repeat and have quite a bit of sort of a rinse and repeat, we do see things like infrastructure that develops, both roads, schools, clinics, but there's a lot of other intangible things that we can't see but are occurring because of funds that have flowed through after the program is ended. And that's really the organization's goal, to sort of map those out and measure those.
So Neely, I really loved hearing you mention the importance of incorporating time for donors to reflect on their experience while they're traveling. Can you tell us a little bit about how this serves to deepen their commitment and investment in the communities that they visit?
Yeah, so one thing that we know is that our trips are really intense. They're really early mornings, really long days. You're often being talked at a lot by somebody in a language or an accent that you don't understand about human rights violations. It's a lot for a person to take in, and even our most sophisticated donors are often taken out of their comfort zone. And so we really stand behind what I said in my presentation, that we believe that people remember what they discover on their own. And I think we've all been part of group learning experiences where we haven't had any time to pause and process while it's happening. And we're expected to do all of that when it's over. And then it's almost too late. So we really value different kind of modalities for people to learn and to process while they're in country. And we also think our donors are really smart, and we want them to learn with and from each other. So the only way that we can do that is if we facilitate opportunities for that to happen formally and organically. So I think a lot of people, and including myself, and I always say this in the field, can get a little turned off by like the feelingsy part of group learning experiences. But even the biggest doubter always comes around once by the end of a week they realize that they've kind of had some time to sit with everything they're experiencing as it's happening.
All right, Jim. So we've all experienced difficulty in trying to quantify qualitative experiences, right? Especially when we're developing metrics for our travel programs. Can you tell us a little bit about what tactics that you have found most effective in tracking and communicating about program performance?
Sure. That's a challenging question that many people in the development field or fundraising field are faced with in terms of attributing how a trip can affect philanthropic behavior. We are very fortunate at the WWF to have an individual whom I call the Nate Silver of development in our organization. He's able to measure a lot of statistics in terms of how the behavior of donor behavior of individuals before they take a trip and after they take a trip, how many people are acquired, and really existing donors, how much they are giving before the trip and after the trip. There's, again, must qualify that travel is just one touch point. And so with any kind of marketing, you're looking at kind of an aggregation of touch points. But there seems to be a pretty clear correlation. And this is very powerful data to collect, because ultimately, it's an investment to have a travel program. And the question is this a good investment on the part of the institution to develop these trips, to create these experiences, to ultimately powerfully illustrate what the work that the organization is doing?
Okay, guys, I have just a couple more questions, then we'll open it up. So, guys, since we are all in the business of storytelling, really, can you please share a success story of a donor who traveled with your organization and, as a direct result of that experience, made a gift that significantly impacted the community or the destination that they visited?
So we have run a few trips around climate mitigation, and I have this gift up on my bulletin board. It is a letter from a state senator who sent me a thank you note after a trip that we did to look at different issues that are facing us with climate change. And after that trip took place, legislation was passed in the state of Massachusetts after that journey. So it was something that truly affected a larger system. And to me, that was like the ultimate win after checking airport transfers, and you sort of realize what you're doing it for. The foundation also got the other resources that they needed as well. So that was something that had a long-term effect that I'm quite proud of.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, we had a donor who was supporting us at about the $10,000 level annually. He didn't engage with us any further than that. And he considers himself kind of an adventurous guy. So on a whim, he joined our study tour to India in 2018 with about 2 weeks' notice. I don't know how anyone ever does that. And he, in our kind of opening session, he said, I don't really identify as Jewish, even though I grew up that way. I'm a celebrationist. And I'm here really to see the work. I'm not really into the feelings. I'm not really into the reflection. If I could do this on my own, I would get on a motorbike and do it in 3 days. But he very politely and kindly put up with all of our, 7 days full of programming. And in the final session, he volunteered to share that for the first time he felt that he could identify with his Jewish values because he could not believe that a Jewish organization took a group of white, wealthy Westerners to sit on the floor with Muslim girls in southern India to hear their stories and learn about their experiences. And for the first time, he felt like he could identify with this part of him that he had not for so long. He then returned and made a $100,000 gift to the organization, and he joined our board of trustees. And he'll be traveling with us again to India in 2020 and meeting with Azad to continue to see how his growing impact is making a difference in the lives of the people who he's supporting. So we have many of hymns, not always, but we're really proud of that engagement.
The story that stands out in my mind, and this is in my prior job with Geographic Expeditions, is that we had many travelers who had traveled with us multiple times, and this one individual had traveled, I think, over 20 times with us. And so one day she calls up and says, hi, Jim, you're going to be hearing from my attorney. And I'm going, oh, okay. And then she said, well, your trips have been such a meaningful part of my life that I'm going to set aside some money from my estate for you all to direct to the nonprofit organizations that you all already support. And that's your decision. And I said, wow, that's a great example of how powerful travel can be on an individual.
It's incredible. Thanks for sharing, guys. All right, we have some time for some audience questions. We have about 5 minutes for them. So if there are any in the audience, please go ahead and raise your hand. Or any on the Twitter. Oh, there's one. I'm real good at that.
Hi, thank you all for being here. My name is Gabriela, and I'm from Venezuela. My question is that I'm guessing that you don't run trips to all the communities where your organizations are currently working. So how do you select those communities where you're actually going to be holding your travel programs? What needs to be in place to align the interests of the organizations, but also the trends and the places that people want to see? Thank you.
That's a great question. Just jump in.
Yeah, although our principal travel partner for our member travel program is Natural Habitat, we work with other tour operators, and James Thornton gave a wonderful speech this morning, and one of those partners is Intrepid. And so we just finished a project last year where we've identified an area in Nepal, Royal Chitwan National Park, where there's a community that could really benefit from tourism. But it also is in a conservation area where we're trying to work with communities to make wildlife more alive than dead. And so together we created this community-based homestay where Intrepid travelers visit. They market the place, so they don't have to market in anything. And so that was a program that our staff, a village that our staff identified along with Intrepid because it was along their itinerary route. And so it made sense for them financially and philanthropically, and it also made sense for WWF.
Neely, did you have thoughts too?
Yeah, as I said, AJWS has 453 grantee partners in 19 countries, and the safety and security of our partners are our biggest priority, as well as the safety and security of our travelers. So we can't visit nearly even half of those 453 partners, or even all of the 19 countries where we work. So we think really closely about which partners have the capacity to host a group of Westerners who are primarily white and non-white countries, because it draws a lot of attention, and we want to make sure that we're not drawing negative attention to them or to their communities. So we think really closely about who has the capacity to host, and we also want to tell a story of AJWS's impact in just 7 days. So we think about places where we have longer-term partners, newer partners, partners that are working amongst a variety of portfolios, because we want kind of an arc of an experience on each of our trips. So this is all done in very close partnership with our programs division. Are my colleagues who hold the relationships with these partners. And we kind of think about all these things, and safety and security is at the top of the list.
We have time for another one, if anybody has one. There's one over in the corner here. Getting better at this.
Hello, I'm Claire from Learning Service. I want to just pick up on one of the points that Neely was just making. The clients that you work with are, donors that are giving you tens of thousands of dollars. How do you deal with the kind of power dynamics when people are coming in from outside and know that they have a lot of cash behind them, and maybe want to give it in ways that fall outside of your programs, or want to try and influence your programs or communities unduly?
It's a great question, and one that we think about a lot. The easy answer is that we're really lucky that our donors are amazing. And one of the reasons that they give to us is because they understand their privilege, and this is how they choose to kind of to live it. And so we are really thoughtful about our pre-trip communications, as Jim was indicating. And we think about kind of how we're setting up. So we don't call our grantees, we call them partners, because they're our partners in this work. And we want to be really clear that this is not a cash exchange. We are two communities of people who have a shared vision for the world, and we're just bridging them. We also do that a lot through the curriculum that I was talking about. Our first session, the first morning during orientation, before we step foot in a community, is about ethical community engagement. And it's a session that was developed for an adult audience about really what is our impact and how are we showing up in these communities. Everything from making eye contact with the person who's speaking, not the person who's translating, to thinking about how to respond if somebody comes up to you directly and asks you for money. And we have a whole kind of policy around this that we share in advance. The last thing I'll say is that AJWS has a policy not to accept any restricted gifts above below $10,000, because we really encourage our donors, and almost all of them do, to give us money and then let our programmatic experts, both in the US and in country, determine how that money needs to be spent based on the priority of our partners. So we have really great donors who are respectful and kind and understand their privilege, and we also facilitate and curate opportunities to have those really frank and honest discussions before we're traveling, during the travel, and after travel.
Well, that's our time, guys. I hope you'll all join me in thanking Catherine and Neely and Jim for sharing today.